Most people don't like their jobs.
What I noticed is a lot of students were sort of excellent sheep, really good at following instructions, following the rules, and just sort of going through the motions. And I also started to notice students getting tracked into professions that seemed really safe.
That's a trap we all often fall into, where we're listening to so many outside influences instead of knowing ourselves.
Meet Betsy, WILLS, and Alex Ellison,
who will help you uncover your innate talents
with science-backed strategies.
Unlike our interest and some of our personality, aptitudes, by the time we turn 17, they're fixed. They don't change. So there's over 52 aptitudes actually that can be measured, and people are just not aware of it. You can't game these assessments. They're going to ask you to do things, and it will reveal whether you have that aptitude or not. And you'll be surprised at the answers that come back.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Unlock Your Potential. This is Jeff Lerner, your host. Always so excited to be back with you, having amazing conversations with amazing humans, sometimes more than one of them, like today, where we're joined by Betsy, WILLS, and Alex Ellison. So real quick bio on both. Betsy is the co-founder of UScience, a national online-based education and career platform headquartered about 3.5 hours north of me in American Fork, Utah. I'm in St. George. I think everybody knows. She's a regular guest lecturer at Vanderbilt and NYU. She's been a featured speaker for TEDx Women. I actually watched her TED Talk this morning. She's also a marketing and branding director for a wealth management firm. And we're going to get to what brings her to this show, which is the book that she co-wrote with Alex, Your Hidden Genius, which has a super cool concept behind it. But before that, let me tell you about Alex. She's an education consultant with a private guidance counseling practice. I think that means she's one of those people that helps you get your kids into like the school you want, maybe. I don't know if she could tell us about that. She also writes and lectures extensively on the subject of careers and college readiness. She's spoken at South by Southwest and TEDx. And look, they're both really smart and they're very accomplished and they have prolific resumes, and we'll be here all day if I just read them. Instead, let's talk to them. Welcome to the show, Alex and Betsy.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Thanks for having us.
For sure. Super stoked to have you both. I always, as a practical matter, I think this is the third time that I've had multiple guests on the show. Let's see, one that comes to mind, it was a pair of females that had launched this wildly successful like online planner. So there was like a pair that kind of took off in the e-com Etsy world. And then the other was, I don't remember if they were husband, wife, or boyfriend, girlfriend. I just know they had different last names, but they were a partnership, male, female, that were sex educators. So that was a lot of fun. And then now here we are with you guys. So excited to see where this goes. Maybe just as a prelude for the audience, the book that you guys have co-written is called Your Hidden Genius. And it's really about lifelong career wellness. I mentioned I listened to Betsy's TED Talk this morning, and essentially the point it makes is people are living longer, which means people are working longer, which means it's an even greater tragedy if people don't like what they do with most of their adult time, which is work. And you guys are on a crusade to help people maybe love their work more and thus be happier since they got to live longer now. Fair enough?
I think that's great. Yeah, we get to live longer. I hope that's what we get.
Oh yeah, I was kind of dark the way I said it. Like, no, we have to live longer.
Great.
Yeah, but we're on a mission actually to use science and the tools that are now available, which are really breakthrough for people, to essentially understand what makes them tick. And the UScience, the company I co-founded in 2010, is on that mission for students and people who are in college or the very first part of their career. And the book is geared towards those people, of course, to give them more information, but also towards you and me, because we are going to live longer. And it's essential in this backdrop that we consider what our natural gifts are. And so that we can bring those to all the pivots and zigs and zags that we're inevitably going to have to make.
Yeah, I think you said in your talk, was it 5 or 7? I can't remember. We'll have either 5 or 7 different careers now in the course of an adult life.
Easily.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, actually, as a starting point, how'd the two of you get together? And I'm curious, how do you view each of your respective roles in the partnership?
It's a great question. Not too long after Betsy co-founded UScience, I was working with high school students, starting out actually in rural Nevada is where I was at the time. And what I noticed is a lot of students, we're sort of excellent sheep, like William Deresiewicz talks about in his book, Excellent Sheep. They're really good at following instructions, following the rules, and just sort of going through the motions. And I also started to notice students getting tracked into professions that seemed really safe really early on. And so I actually got really interested in this idea of job hopping. And so that was what my TEDx talk was about. And I really wanted to figure out, like, how do we prepare people to be super nimble and easily, and can kind of like easily maneuver their careers over a long lifetime. And so Betsy and I connected a little while after that when she was giving her TEDx talk, and we kept in touch over the years. And in 2020, I think we were both feeling pretty restless. She'd been working on a manuscript. And I was like, gosh, I feel like I need to do something, right? We were all feeling, I think, very restless at that time. And so we connected and started working on this book. So that was almost 5 years ago.
So this book was a COVID baby.
Oh, yeah. I didn't think about that, Betsy. Yeah, this is our COVID baby for sure.
9 months after COVID, a lot of things were birthed, perhaps including this book.
And I was excited to write this with Alex because I'm 58 and, she's about 20 years or more younger than I am. And I really wanted to span a longer period than just, this is just for a 20-year-old or just for a 40-year-old. Because aptitudes, which we're going to talk a lot about, are very unique in that they don't change. Unlike our interest and some of our personality aspects, aptitudes, by the time we turn 17 or 18 years old or finish puberty, they're fixed. And that's what's fabulous about them, in that if you understand what your aptitudes are, they're sort of a constant North Star for you to keep coming back to and redeploy in different ways across these 7, 8, 9, maybe more careers that we're going to all have to, embrace over time. So I wanted the perspective of Alex, who was seeing people just starting their careers. And then, of course, I was going to bring my own experience. And I know, Jeff, I don't know exactly how old you are, but I know you have 4 children, and I can imagine you've learned a lot in that process. So getting those voices. In the book, we actually interview over 80 people from age 69 to as young as 17. So the book will speak to everyone in that way.
So just a little bit of context, and I'll be briefer than I might otherwise if it were just the 3 of us, but we know that there's an audience too, and the audience knows my story plenty well. So I'll spare them the long version, but just like, I do think it's just important to declare that philosophically and in terms of like our professional thrust, we're kind of in the same lane here. I mean, for us and my platform Entra, we steer a lot of people, not everyone, I guess, to maybe dispel a brand point of brand confusion. I think I think people think that everyone at Entra we're training them to be entrepreneurs. That's not actually right. Our methodology is called life design, and we just want people, our target is the word fulfillment. Like, how can we maximize the probability that a human life ends in fulfillment, not regret? But for a lot of people, per our methodology, because of we're taking the same data and maybe taking a slightly different approach to it, which is most people don't like their jobs. And most people do their jobs because they are locked into a deteriorating financial equation. That the ironic tragedy is most people don't like their jobs, yet they cling to them because of a financial pressure that in today's world, unlike maybe generations past, the math doesn't even pencil out. So it's like you're hanging on to this thing that's still not going to get you where you want when you're 65 or 70 years old. So what are we even doing? And, I guess the thinking is, well, some security is better than no security. But a lot of people don't realize nearly 50% of all entrepreneurs build a 7-figure net worth. And you can't say that about employees. So our approach to it is we teach a lot of people how to start their own thing, at least on the side. You guys, it sounds like, are more, maybe even more agnostic, where it's like, we don't really care what they do. We just want them to understand their aptitudes so they can do something that aligns with them. What a profound insight to realize your aptitudes are set by the time you're 17, 18 years old. So it doesn't matter what age you are, you can test them and respond accordingly.
Well, and then
Right.
also you're not stuck reacting to the economy, to whatever's happening around you. You can be a lot more proactive using your aptitudes as this sort of compass to realign as your career shifts or as things change in your life, so that you're making choices rather than just defaulting, right?
Right. And with entrepreneur, the word entrepreneur is huge. I mean, there's so many ways you can do that. The great thing about aptitudes are there, whatever your pattern is for your aptitudes, you'll learn what deficits you may have that you need to fill in to be successful as an entrepreneur. So nobody comes complete, as you know. So that's the secret of that. But I think it'd be maybe a good idea to back up and kind of explain what are aptitudes, because
Right.
I think most people have no idea. When we ask people, do you know what your aptitudes are? They'll inevitably say, "Oh, I took StrengthsFinder," or my Myers-Briggs is this, or my Enneagram is that.
Right.
So here's how to distinguish what is an aptitude. If you don't mind, we'll start there.
Please.
So there's over 52 aptitudes actually that can be measured, and people are just not aware of it. And the reason for this is because heretofore, they were very expensive to measure. You had to go to a center and have someone give you these little exercises to do one-on-one. And so technology is now allowing those assessments to come into the broader picture. And that's really what UScience did. We didn't invent this assessment. It's been going since the 1920s. The things that you can measure that people are not aware of range from things like glare factor, which literally some people are more bothered by glare than other people on a continuum. This doesn't matter for most jobs. It matters if you're going to be a truck driver or you're going to fly an airplane. They will test you for this. But we don't assess that because we could be here all day testing 52 aptitudes. But that is an aptitude. Other things would be like the musical aptitudes, which I'm sure that, Jeff, you have. And there's actually 3 separate musical aptitudes, tone, rhythm, and pitch. And you really need all 3 to pursue music. And we'll talk more about that some other time offline. But with regards to UScience and the assessment that's included in the book, or a code to take the assessment online, we assess things like spatial ability. Some people are 3D thinkers and some people are not. You can't game these assessments. They're going to ask you to do things, and it will reveal whether you have that aptitude or not. Things like inductive reasoning. Another one that I'm sure you have, Jeff, is idea rate. And Alex and I can talk about our own scores there to illustrate this, if that's okay.
Please, please.
Well, so we talk about a good partnership, right? It's funny because my favorite phrase is let's try it and see what happens. And Betsy's is have we considered fill in the blank. So there was this constant push and pull while we were writing this book. It's because I score as what's called a concentrated focuser. So I'm like, buy the first wedding dress I tried on, I'm like, give me a smaller menu at the restaurant. And I also really like to focus on one idea and drill into it at a time. And so Betsy, on the other hand, is like churning out ideas, can barely like go to sleep at night because she just cannot shut off that flow, right? And so when we were writing this book, she would come to the table with a million different ideas. I would want to quickly pick one and start working on it and see what happened and then iterate. And so it's actually frustrating, right, in the process, but you end up with such a better product because of this balance, right? We're sort of like a counterweight to each other. And that's what we like to emphasize with all of these aptitudes is, self-awareness is great. Navel gazing is great. But after a certain point in time, you need to like realize this is going to give you greater empathy and understanding of others so that you can work better with your partner or, your co-author or your team.
The way it's assessed, I won't give away in the on the podcast, but I hope everybody will get the book and have access to the assessment and take it so they have their own experience. But people who score like I do as a rapid idea rate, they tend to do very well if you put them in situations where they're exercising that. So public speaking, teaching, writing, improv even, anything that, some certain types of sales, marketing. You do not want your pilot or your surgeon to have this. Okay. So it's counterintuitive for people to understand when we assess aptitudes, they're not good or bad. It's rather the combination of aptitudes that you have that is where the magic is. So it's not like any other assessment where you're self-reporting, which is 98% of all assessments out there. You self-report an answer. And that acts like a boomerang because you're basically telling a survey, I like to work with my hands, or I love working around people. And the survey comes back and says, oh, you like to work with people. You're like, okay, duh, This is quite different. You actually almost feel like you're, I guess, failing the assessment every time you're taking it. More people say that than not. And they're not at all failing, but the assessment takes you across these dimensions. I think there's 14, and it takes 87 minutes, by the way, to complete it. Everyone feels like a game, and you'll be surprised at the answers that come back.
You make an interesting distinction, because in our, and I guess again, some context connection here in Entre, we actually have an assessment we call Entrepreneur DNA that is designed to prescribe a certain cluster of entrepreneurial options, or what we call income vehicles, to say, oh, you need to make more money than you can make through your job. Of all the things that are out there, here's a few that we think might match you. And so I guess I have personally observed the distinction that you just called out, which is that if you ask people to self-assess aptitudes, most of them tell you their preferences.
That is exactly right.
And they're not, and it's interesting because humans, highly fallible, often illogical and inscrutable beings that we are, we often prefer things that don't actually align with our aptitudes.
Well,
buttons for punishment.
Preferences are based on what you've already been exposed to, right?
Yeah.
So if I grew up on this, on the south side of Chicago, or in San Francisco, with a well-off family or a low-income family, or with parents who are doctors or parents who are, lawyers, all of those factors are going to affect our preferences. And so it's impossible to take a survey without our own bias influencing the outcome. And that's the beauty of these unbiased objective assessments.
Right. And to the point of your approach, really, it is about unlocking your actual potential, not your perceived potential. And that's super exciting to people because inevitably they'll get the results, which also map to a million different possibilities for them. And you'll actually see people sit up straighter. They're like, oh my gosh, I never considered that before. And so that's the whole idea. Is a lot of people think that we have a talent gap in America. And what we actually have is an exposure gap.
Yeah. When I was researching for my book, one statistic I'll share that you guys may already know or will certainly fit in with your data set. 83% of, I think I'm getting this right, it's been 4 years, but 83%, if I remember correctly, of all college degrees fall within one of 8 basic categories. Because those are the categories that the alumni and corporate donors are telling the universities, these are the jobs we need to fill. And so all the career and the academic advisors steer people into these basic 8 sets of degrees. 5 out of 6 college students are going to basically go get one of 8 types of jobs because the economy has said this is what we want. But, to reference what Betsy said in her TED Talk, we're filling yesterday's economy with tomorrow's employees. And 10 years from now, that's probably not going to work that well.
Absolutely. And media plays a huge role. We talk about in our book how you'll see a surge of kids wanting to go to culinary school when there's a really popular, celebrity chef show, or the CSI shows, those series that really influenced criminal justice majors, right? So we're very impressionable, and we're not, we're sort of being pushed and pulled this way and that way based on what's popular or what we're hearing or what we're seeing.
And that's great because media renderings are super accurate of what those jobs are like, right?
100%. Absolutely. If you've watched Grey's Anatomy, you can be a doctor.
No, you basically are a doctor.
You are a doctor.
We play one on TV. I do talk about this. This is a good story. I think you'll like to that point is one of the people we assessed, she grew up with animals. Her family told her whole life. And parents have such an influence on what we think we should do as well. Obviously, they're our biggest influence. But they told her, you should be a vet because she loved animals as a child and had every stuffed animal. She had a pot-bellied pig. She had a horse, obviously, dogs, cats, parakeets, gerbils, everything. And she was a good student. And so she goes through college and all this time thinking, I'm going to be a vet. I'm going to be a vet. Gets into veterinary school, which is not easy. and comes to see me 2 years into veterinary school and says, I'm miserable. And she said, I do love animals, but I didn't realize until I got into this that I really don't like sick animals. And there's a big difference.
Yeah.
And I tell that because I think that's a trap we all, often fall into, where we're listening to so many outside influences instead of knowing ourselves. And that's what, aptitudes really get you back to that center of what the seeds of your skills actually are, and help you kind of think about how these can be used to make your fulfillment and your satisfaction in your work, no matter what the job is.
Yeah, if you don't know how much of why you like something is because you really like the thing versus you like the approval of certain other people that expect you to like the thing.
Sure.
If you're not crystal clear on that, then you have no clue if you actually like the thing.
That's right.
And often what we're good at becomes an interest. Like you get really good at something and that's fun. And then that becomes an interest.
Well, and you make a really important point too with the veterinary, the distinction between, I love animals versus I love the act of treating sick animals. I was
Very
a professional
different.
musician for a decade. I love music. I did not love the career of being a working musician. I mean, if I'm being honest now, I think there was a lot of time where the reality of being a working musician was dominated by the idea of music and my love for this idea. But it wasn't, honestly, I think until I was out of it was hindsight. It's kind of like a bad relationship where sometimes you can't see until you're outside of it. Like I was not happy.
Well, you bring up another good point of that oftentimes things that we love doing, they don't have to fit into our job. They can be in our avocations. And we always talk about, we always want to kind of put our job on the witness stand as the problem, but oftentimes it's an unmet aptitude that's keeping us from feeling fulfilled in our lives. So where we put these aptitudes and abilities, it matters. I mean, to your point earlier, we do want to sleep indoors. That's important. Okay. Okay. So, and parents want their children to sleep indoors. And so everybody's motivation around pushing us into certain careers that are safe or will make money, that's all good. But sorting that out, the difference between an avocation or a hobby and paid work is also very important.
I mean, so much of that distinction is the difference between a thing and the job of doing a thing for money.
Correct.
Are often so different. Being a writer and getting paid to write, totally different things. Being a musician and getting paid to make music, totally different things. Being a scientist who pursues your wild ideas versus having to get grants and do research to get more money for the thing, totally different worlds. So here's a question. I Googled it while you guys were talking. If you saw me peeking off to the right, it's because I was Googling what percentage of people dislike their jobs. And the first article, first of all, it seemed like there's a very wide range of numbers published on the subject. But the first article that came up was a LinkedIn article that says, essentially the meta number, the aggregate of all the different studies is that as much as 85% of people dislike their jobs, which is a human tragedy, honestly, because it's the thing most of us do with most of our time that we're awake. So here's a question. How much of people's dislike for their jobs do you think is aptitude misalignment versus how much of it is just that, like, intrinsically, at least some percentage of people don't like being told what to do or that they have to do a thing at certain times to make money out of a dependency? Like, in other words, it's just like the whole paradigm of having to have a job itself is the source of the frustration versus misalignment within the paradigm.
There's actually some interesting articles out there that you can also find that show the difference between burnout and boredom. And we often talk about, like, aptitude misalignment can lead to one of those two things. And usually when we are burning out in our jobs, like burning at both ends, it's because we're overtaxing aptitudes that we may not have, and we're feeling fatigued, and we're not allowed to use the ones we do possess. And then when we're bored, right? It's like we're underwhelmed. We're not using these aptitudes. And so, I think that's number one. Number two is, you pursued a job that matched your interests at age 20. And often when you do that, you're leaving aptitudes on the table. So you start to get bored. The other thing we're seeing, which is really important that we don't necessarily talk a whole lot about in the book, but is important, is work context. Work context is changing very rapidly. I mean, I'm a counselor and I work from home over Zoom. That's pretty new. You know, we have telemedicine now. So the context of our work is changing a lot. And I think that has caught some people off guard as well. Early in the book, we actually interview a guy who worked in tech in Silicon Valley. And he took one of those work sabbaticals. Did you hear about this? You know, a few years ago, these people were tech people were taking these work sabbaticals to go do something for a year. And he said he was so exhausted at work when things moved online, because he said, Alex, you know, I used to go to LA, fly to LA for one meeting. We would have lunch, we would socialize, and it was all for one meeting. Now you can cram in 8 meetings into a day because they're all just back to back over Zoom. So I think there are multiple factors at play there.
I think what you just put a label on my question, and what I was really asking was about, I didn't know the term, but work context is kind of what I was saying. Is like, how much job dissatisfaction is just people don't like being told you have to get up at this hour, shower, brush your teeth, get in a car for this much time, go to this place. Now you're trapped. If you left the stove on, you can't do anything about it because your kitchen is an hour away. And then they own you for that period of time, and you have to breathe the forced air and, you know, endure the fluorescent lights. I mean, I'm like the guy who has categorically considered himself unemployable since childhood. It's half the reason I became a musician, because I just don't want to go sit in some effing building being told what to do all day. That's work context, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
But it can also be your boss.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be different things. I mean, I just tag on to that. It can be your boss. It can be a lot of things. But, you know, when I started doing this 20 some odd years ago, I thought I was going to help at that moment women coming back into the workforce. That was sort of my target audience. Okay. Not with youth science and aptitude assessment, but just coaching people. But it turned out the number one person who wanted to come talk to me were 40-year-old male lawyers. And that's when the light bulb went off for me. About everyone sort of has this nagging feeling at one time or another that maybe they're not happy in their job or whatever it is. But do you think the best thing to do is to jettison that job? No.
Well,
Most of the time,
if you went to law school and
well, exactly. This investment is, yes, but there are great pivots just 2 degrees to the right or 2 degrees to the left that can really make a difference. And I think understanding what your aptitudes are can be a huge catalyst for that. But we would uncover people's aptitudes in high idea rate or strong inductive reasoning or whatever it would be. And it would give us clues to be like, hey, go volunteer to write for the company newsletter or be a part of the training team. Get on the training team. You've got a natural ability here you can use. Or take guitar lessons on the weekend. You know, it could be something that you can do as an avocation.
So it feels like part of what you're saying is, like, this isn't like some sort of utopian 100% of your work is going to be fulfilling all the time. I
don't believe it ever will be.
Yeah, it feels like you're saying it's more that over the course of, let's say, 2,000 hours a year that you spend working, as long as you're touching on these aptitudes and not overburdening these others that maybe aren't as, you know, up to the task, then like the net experience can be really fulfilling. But we're not saying that every minute is going to be like, you know, joyous.
No, we live in a practical world. Let's face it. But it can be much, much better.
That's really encouraging, because it sounds like, you know, small adjustments at the margins can actually suffuse the entire thing with a lot more fulfillment.
Enjoy.
Like writing the newsletter might be 2 hours a week at the law office.
That's your pride in doing that and exercising that ability. Go ahead, Alex. Sorry.
And I was just going to say, it's permission to do more of those things. So I see, you know, when people open up their results, it's like, oh, it's like a permission slip to do more of the writing, to sit more in those design meetings. You know, we were actually talking to our editor, who's very spatial, and she was thrilled because she was like, I've always wanted to sit in on the design meetings, and now I'm just going to say, I want to be there. You know, so it's this wonderful invitation.
Yeah, well, and as an employer, you know, I live in this sort of interesting tension between, you know, I evangelize that for a lot of people, the long-term solution to their fulfillment challenges is to like get more autonomy and be more independent and entrepreneurial. But at the same time, I run an organization, and the last thing I need is everybody quitting on me to go start their own business. So I'm very aware of how to be the change in the employment context so that I'm the one place that people actually want to stay working, forever. And so for me, it's like, how do I make sure that everybody has something that really fills their cup, because at least some part of their weekly or monthly remit is super aligned with their aptitudes.
That's right. And again, we have written lots of supporting workshops, et cetera, for employees and employers to use this, because we aren't advocating everybody quit their job. We want them to get more out of their job and advocate for the activities that they can bring more to the table and more learning in the job that they're in. That being said, I mean, I do admit some people do need to switch jobs. There's no doubt about that. And they will anyway. There's going to be attrition. But the first thing isn't to put your job on the witness stand as the problem.
So so for the employer, and if I think of the audience of this show, I don't know the numbers, but I mean, there are some listeners are people, I mean, some I don't know. Some are people who are dissatisfied with a job, and that's how they found me, was they were like looking for alternative income solutions. They're either dissatisfied with their job or they're dissatisfied with their income, which aren't actually the same thing. Right? They might love their job. They just need something else. So that's a set. And then you have people that are maybe a little further down that path where they've started a business, or they've grown a business, and they have a team, and their minds are probably thinking about this conversation, at least the way mine is in part, which is, oh, this seems like a retention approach. How can I optimize my work environment to help all my people be more aligned with their aptitudes? How does that work for, let's say, an employer who's listening to this and is like, I have a 10-person office, and it's a huge deal if somebody quits and I have to replace them and lose all that institutional knowledge. I want to keep everybody forever, ideally. What should that person do? Do you have a program they can come sign up to have everybody take the aptitude quiz? And then how do you help them if you do figure out how to steer people accordingly?
Well, I gave this to my whole team. And one of the things that I do regularly with one of my employees is very spatial, and very three-dimensional. I'm moderately so, but it's not my main thing. And so when I can tell that there's been several weeks where she's been doing a lot of admin, a lot of emails, I'll say, hey, you know what, Lizzie, why don't you design our next Canva flyer for this upcoming webinar? Why don't you do some design stuff? Because I know that's a muscle that she needs to exercise. So you just have that in the back of your mind, and you can help your team achieve that kind of balance and tap those aptitudes before it's a problem. The other day, I realized that everyone on my team is high idea rate, like Betsy. So I was like, man, I'm the only one who's concentrated, focused. But what works really well is in our team, we call them water cooler chats. They all come up with a million ideas. And then I'm usually the one that picks the thing that we're going to go with, right? Because I'm the executor. And that works really well. And they're thrilled with that because they have a hard time picking the thing. And so you can kind of do this. But yeah, to Betsy's point, we do encourage teams to take the assessment. And then we have these wonderful workshop sort of guidelines that can take a team through a discussion around these things.
And this is kind of a mercenary thing to say, but I'm saying it responsively to something I've experienced recently in our organization, where we had a really talented designer who was also very expensive. I think anytime we needed a slideshow and design, and by the way, if you know who you are, if
She's
you hear
listening.
this, I'll overweight what I'm about to say, because we're still going to use you on certain projects. But maybe she's not a listener of the show. But generally, like, we were way overpaying for low-level design tasks, because like she was our designer, and I think it was $180 an hour to have like a flyer designed for 30 minutes. It'd be like $90 for a little 30-minute flyer, right? Now, what we as part of some restructuring, we haven't used her. I basically said, don't send her any projects without me signing off that it's a significant enough project, it's worth that cost. And so you've had probably 80% of our design needs have been picked up by someone else in our organization,
Right.
who I had no idea think they were into design, and I started seeing these designs, and finally I felt asking, who's doing this? Like, we're not paying so-and-so anymore. And like, oh yeah, so-and-so's doing it. Like, they just found the time magically. Suddenly 80% of our design is just happening. My payroll didn't go up, my payroll went down. And so
That's
as an owner, it's like, if you start to know who has these maybe untapped aptitudes, you might be able to economize your team.
That's right.
Well,
yeah.
And think about the investment, small investment you could make in, hey, I'll sign you up for a certification course in that if you'd like to go further and even get better. Wow, how invested and, complimented would another employer feel on the team, like, you really do care about my own development and I can grow here, versus stuck with a job description they may have signed up for 3 years ago and they're feeling sort of burnout because they're not growing. So it can uncover opportunities for people to also give them a language to advocate for themselves. Like, hey, you've got this 3D ability. What would you want? What would you like to do with that? And what could you contribute here at work with that?
Yeah. And so to kind of sum up, I think the light bulb moment that I'm having is that let's assume that 80% of any job isn't awesome. It's just kind of the mundane, doing of the job. But you can cure 100% of the dissatisfaction by tweaking the 20% that is malleable, because let's assume the 80% that isn't awesome is just the stuff that has to be done. That's great. But just tweak the sides, tweak the fringes, and now you might be able to make even the 80% 100% more tolerable, because that one little 5% piece I now have that stimulates me makes it all okay. That's like super cool. It's kind of like a one date night a week and cure the entirety of a marriage.
Yes.
It doesn't mean
I think
that you quit your job and spend all your time together.
you hit the nail on the head. Yeah, exactly.
Real quick, I want to let you know about my text message community. So I use text messages to provide unique value to my podcast listeners. These texts can just be random thoughts. It can be letting you be the first to know about an event I'm planning or some free training that I'm planning to host for the community. Just shoot me a text to get subscribed to the list. The number is 702-996-3926. Again, that number is 702-996-3926. Now let's get back to the podcast. Speak to the skeptic in me. Talk to me about the science behind your assessment.
Can I share my screen real quick? I think we've got to show you a visual here, Jeff.
Let me say, if you're listening to this on audio only, we're going to put the link to the YouTube video in the show notes.
And while Alex is pulling that up, why don't I just give you a little bit of the history of this? Aptitude assessments have been studied since the 1920s. And actually, Johnson O'Connor, who was one of the pioneers of this in the 1920s, was hired by GE, and it was simply to optimize the assembly line, because one of the aptitudes is small dexterity, finger dexterity, believe it or not. And so they noticed that if they could get more people with finger dexterity on that assembly line, obviously they'd be more productive. So this let loose this whole study of these things. And again, now there's 52 that we can actually measure. By World War II, the U.S. government used aptitude assessments heavily. And if you've been in the military, you probably had some version of an aptitude assessment. Why did they do this? Because they needed the most efficient way to train people. And what aptitudes point to is where you can learn the fastest something. So people with certain aptitude patterns were better at flying the plane. Others were better at navigating the plane. Others were better at jumping out of the plane. Those were 3 different sets. So this study went on and on and on. The assessment science uses is the same assessment that you used to pay $1,000 for, and you can still go pay $1,000 to take at Johnson O'Connor. It's the exact same assessment. We just brought it into the online environment. And we had, teams and teams of psychometricians to make sure that you get the same results as, someone who's 45 years old as someone who's 17, so that it's a stable and valid assessment. But what we also found out by mapping these assessments to the U.S. government database, which is called ONET, which you're about to see, is that it is very easily and accurately pinpoints certain careers and jobs for you to explore. So, Alex, you can take it from there.
Right. So as Betsy said, so when you take the assessment at the end, your results page gives you lists and lists of careers that map to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So we can see how well certain jobs match with your aptitudes. So this is an example of, so you see all the variety here, right? Believe it or not, this is actually one person. The difference is if you look at the bottom row first, this bottom row.
And actually, real quick for
Yeah.
the audio only, can you describe what you're showing? Real quick?
Oh, please. Yes, thank you. So I'm showing 2 rows of jobs, and we've got everything from avionics technician to neurodiagnostic technician to a computer network architect. Then on the next row, we've got choreographer, makeup artist, fashion designer, art therapist, and multimedia artist. So we've got these very, very different sets of careers. The bottom row, let me talk about that first. So the bottom row, we've got choreographer, makeup artist, fashion designer, etc. This is based on just this individual's interests. So if I were to just give this person an interest survey, and I was sitting in a counseling office in their, high school saying, okay, your interest survey says you would probably be a great fashion designer, that would be the equivalent of malpractice, in my opinion. Because
So basically, based on this person's interests, what they're into, it's recommending generally something very creative.
very creative, very artistic.
artistic.
This person's very, very interested in creative and artistic things. Now, if I look at the top row, though, this is their aptitude fit. This is where we get, the technicians, the neuroscience, the engineers, the computer network architects. This student is this person is a great fit in terms of their aptitudes for these very technical and scientific careers. So this isn't to say to leave your interest on the table. That's not what we're saying. But it would be totally misguided to tell this person to just go pursue set design, because that is only taking into account their interests, self-reported at that moment in time. We know that interests are not necessarily fixed over time. We just talked about earlier in the show, right? How they can be influenced by watching CSI the night before. So it's really important to see this distinction.
Well,
And why don't you drill down into the data just so we can take one look at that, if you don't mind, Alex? Just pick one.
Oh, in terms of right. I think Betsy's talking about, for example, just some of the salary ranges here. You can see this average salary.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, I'll tell you what I was about to sort of generally state before we get
Sure.
into the data is, because at Entra, we view, again, our target is fulfillment as a state of being. So we look at the totality of a life, and one of the things we're really intentional about is pushing out the time horizon through which we look at a life and think about living, because human beings are very present focused, which leads to bad decision making very often. And so if I'm looking at that, what I'm thinking is, okay, this is a person they're interested in creative artistic things. But if you look at, I didn't even notice that salary was a field, but my immediate thought was, man, the things on the top sure seem to pay a lot better than the things on the bottom. So by matching them to what they're good at or optimized for versus necessarily what they're interested in, and then step back and say, okay, let's talk about your life as a whole. Maybe you really your soul longs to write a great symphony or produce an opera, or you have this artistic bent. And so you're trying to, unintentionally kind of trying to steer professional guidance toward your interest because you're trying to scratch the itch of your soul's deep longing to create and express. But if we look at the totality of a life, what if instead of trying to indulge your creative interests through your job, what if we just put you into something that you're still going to be fulfilled with because it aligns with your aptitudes, and you're going to make a heck of a lot more money? And especially if you're willing to live like a makeup artist, but earn like a computer technician or whatever was on top,
yeah.
then in 20 years, you could probably retire, have
Be a makeup artist.
investment, because you lived like a makeup artist and earned like a computer technician, and then spend the rest of your life writing your symphony without any financial pressure. Beautiful.
Beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can also talk about ways to get more creative at your computer job, or to be in a more creative space. Oftentimes people who are really artistic and creative, they like a little bit more of that entrepreneurial, startup scene where there's a lot of, creative options and creative thinking. And so there are ways to search for more creative environments and contexts, like we talked about earlier, but to tap those aptitudes.
And I have self-disclosure, I'm projecting myself into this conversation. I spent the first 10 years of my career as a jazz musician because I was so anti-traditional corporate structure. But in looking at that, I'm thinking there's a lot, I know for a fact, there's a lot I would have been good at that would have paid a whole lot better. And I
Right.
would have
And
been
that gets
10 years further ahead on the earning curve.
right. And that gets back to the exposure gap. And what's bad is we're telling people to follow their interest at exactly the wrong time instead of explore these interests and explore your aptitudes. That's the key. Is stop and explore first. Go into it with your eyes wide open. Know that if you pursue this particular career and leave everything else not explored, you may be leaving money and fulfillment and a lot of things on the table. So, and that can happen at
even
any
the
point.
future expression of your interest.
That's right.
Because let's
The
say you're a
ability to do
creative
that.
person, or let's say you're like an inventor engineering mind. You could tinker with little toys you can afford at the hardware store right now, or 20 years from now, you could just focus on still aligning with aptitudes but being productive. And then 20 years later, like I'll use my dad as an example. He retired. He built a whole wood shop. He does stuff that's super fulfilling for him, but it's also much more expensive. It would have been cost prohibitive if he tried to make a career out of it.
Right.
Okay, so a big reveal type question. You've mentioned spatial. You've mentioned idea rate. These are like cool, like little glimpses into the minutia of what you do that are like intriguing, right? What's maybe another example of an unrecognized or not often thought about aptitude that you find might have a lot of people either frustrated because they have it and they're not aligned with it in their work, or it holds a lot of promise if people get more, a lot of people have it, and if they get more aligned with it, they'll be a lot happier in their work. Like, what's another one of those that's really kind of intriguing?
I don't know what Betsy would answer, but mine would be diagnostic problem solving. So there's an aptitude that looks at how comfortable you are making decisions with limited information. So making decisions.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
You claim mastery over a concept when you turn it into an acronym. I don't know if you guys know that trick.
Good for you.
And you make everyone very confused. It's great. I love it. So people who are inductive, they are pretty comfortable looking at connections between things that don't seem to have any connections and arriving at conclusions. Literally diagnosing the problem under pressure with limited clues. Other people are what are called fact checkers. These are the people who say, let me sleep on it and get back to you. Let me talk to a few more experts and get back to you. Let me read another book and then I'll decide. Right. And so to know where you land on that continuum, I think is hugely important. And also to know where the other people on your team land is hugely important.
That immediately makes me think of a Harvard Business Review article I read that said the number one differentiating trait of successful CEOs is the ability to make confident and at least more often right than wrong decisions based on limited available information.
Yeah, I know that article. It's excellent.
Yeah.
But let me say because aptitudes are neither good or bad, if you score as a fact checker, man, you are going to be excellent as a hiring manager because we can't sum up people with disparate pieces of information. That HR manager will do the background check, for instance, or the due diligence officer or the risk manager.
The CEO look good by
exactly
heading a lot of problems off at the pass.
So the point is not that, you need this to be an entrepreneur or CEO. No. It's to know where you fall and then to fill in those other gaps that you may not have and build a team that has all those aspects so that you don't get hung up on the wrong hire or whatever it is, and to identify these things in each other and value them.
Not so Alex's pet aptitude was DPS, diagnostic problem solving.
Yeah.
What's your pet aptitude?
Mine might be sequential reasoning, which we also assess. It's a really fun game you'll play online. And what this is people who can kind of see the big picture immediately and make a plan. They're systems thinkers. They're logicians oftentimes. But every aptitude sort of has an Achilles heel. And sometimes the coaching with people who are highly sequential is that they aren't great at communicating a plan. They don't really practice that well. And so that's the coaching for them is if you are highly sequential, which is incredibly valuable as an entrepreneur, because what you can do is create something almost out of nothing, a system out of nothing. But communicating that system down to your team, you need other people who are good at that. So those would be the collaborative planners or the process supporters who would be scoring on the other end of this continuum. But I always look for that with people's scores to find out where they fall, because there's so much you can learn from wherever you fall and how to make your business better by knowing that part about you.
Wow, that one really landed. At Entra, we've just gone through a pretty massive redesign of our entire member journey. And I think as you were saying that, I'm like, I literally match exactly what you just described, because this sort of new member journey was conceived of by me, and it was reasoned sequentially as a member journey. I have really struggled to communicate it with the team, and I finally just landed at, trust me. Trust me. Once
Ooh,
it's
I'm
alive, you'll
uncomfortable
see it,
just hearing that.
Yeah. And I realize there's
But
be a-
I mean,
yeah,
what
trust me.
Jeff, what's happening is we get into people who are sequential might kind of think other people are mind readers, and they're not. Okay. But that doesn't mean it's not hugely valuable. You just need people behind you memorializing these plans, writing out the strategic plan, communicating it down. It doesn't mean that you have to do it, but you do probably need a partner in taking these wonderful new systems you've come up with and getting it scaled.
Yeah.
It's all about scale at that point.
You have me completely intrigued, such that I can already say, after we turn off the recording, I'm going to book another call with you guys, because we have lots to talk about. But separate from that, how can the audience go access this? Like, where would you point them I think for both use cases, the individual who wants to understand their aptitudes better, and maybe the employer or leader who wants to access it for their team?
Yeah, so at yourhiddengenius.com, you can purchase the book and also download some really useful discussion guides, whether this is for like a book club or for you and your partner or for your team, if like a leadership team. So yeah, lots of good information and resources at yourhiddengenius.com.
And so the book includes a unique code to take the assessment, and your results will be your own and private, but that will open up this entire kind of career platform for you with coaching guides, with discussion guides, all kinds of things at uscience.com. So that is included in the book. The book is $29. If you were to go buy the assessment online, it would be $49. So it's a great deal. You get the book, You're going to learn a lot about yourself, plus you'll get all the resources.
Yourhiddengenius.com.
Yeah, and it's available on Amazon and everywhere else, of course, you buy books.
Super, super cool. Well, listen, I am fascinated by what you do, grateful that you do it. Anything that helps more humans have fulfilling lives is a win in my book. So thank you. Thanks for what you do. And also thanks for being a guest here on the show.
Well, thank you for helping unlock everyone's potential.
We're working on it. All right, Alex and Betsy, amazing. And of course, to all you viewers and listeners, so glad we got this time together. Even today, you, the audience, are the best part of this show. You're why we do it. And we're so grateful we had this time together. We will catch you next time.
If you loved that episode, then you're definitely going to love this one. Check it out.
Now more than ever, it is necessary for all of us to become indispensable, whether we own our own thing or whether we work for somebody else. If you're indispensable, you are unable to be fired. You are secure. You are delivering value consistently. And how do we become indispensable? It's not by just taking orders and doing exactly what someone else tells you to do. It's about